So I've talked a lot about children's horror on this channel. I think it's a very important genre of media that sadly seems to be going away. I personally grew up on Goosebumps and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and Coraline and The Invasion of the Road Weenies. I loved all of these creepy books that freaked me out. And one response that I often get when I talk about the lack of children's horror today is, what about Five Nights at Freddy's? And that got me thinking. You see, I was 16 when the first Five Nights at Freddy's game came out, and I remember that my younger brother was the one to introduce me to the series, and he had me play the original game, and it scared the absolute living daylights out of me. I didn't really play a lot of horror video games at that age. I'd read some horror books and watched a couple horror movies, and I'd played the Slender Man game, the 8 Pages game, and maybe a couple other small horror games, but Five Nights at Freddy's in particular really got to me. There was something about the eerie atmosphere and the sound design that made the entire game just feel so menacing. Sitting in that office the entire time just made you feel so helpless. And since I thought the game was interesting, I started to watch more and more videos about the lore of the game. And this fear only got worse when I found out that the animatronics were supposedly haunted by the ghosts of murdered children. The first game literally alludes to the idea that a serial killer lured a couple kids into the back room of the pizzeria and then murdered them, and then after that, he stuffed their corpses into the animatronics. After a while, the animatronics started to smell like decomposing bodies, and blood and mucus started to leak from them as the corpses of the children started to fall apart inside. And am I just crazy, or is that not actually pretty dang scary? We're talking about a game that heavily alludes to child murder and mutilation that takes place in a dingy restaurant after hours. And I think my fear of the game at the time was totally justified. I was never really scared by the actual jump scares. They're not super creepy images or anything, but the tension and atmosphere of it all just made me panic and freeze. The sound design of that first game also does not get enough credit. The eerie laughter from the animatronics, the drone of the ventilation in the back, and the sound of the camera switching from room to room. It all leads up to an experience that is legitimately frightening to this day in my opinion, and I would say that this horror held pretty strong for the first 4 games of the series. I don't think any of them really hit the same heights as the first one when it came to the scares, but they definitely had creepy elements and stories to them, and those stories that they told in the background were always intriguing to me. Now, I'm not going to go deep into the lore of these games. I personally do not have the requisite undergraduate, postgraduate, doctoral, and postdoctorate studies to understand what is actually going on in the insane lore of this series, but I wanted to use Five Nights at Freddy's to talk about a strange, frustrating phenomenon that happens when a young audience latches on to a piece of horror media. The horror media stops being scary. And I'm not referring to the idea that a piece of media that is actually scary gets ruined for you because a bunch of kids are into it. I personally don't really get that feeling about things. I'm talking about a horror series that will start out with the intention of actually scaring an adult audience and then attract a younger audience, and then tone down the horror in the games or the books or the movies or whatever to accommodate that younger audience. Because Five Nights at Freddy's totally did this. Look at the original game and its horrifying atmosphere, the quiet horror and tension that is constantly building. Everything's kind of gross and grimy. Think of that storyline in the background of a child serial killer who is stuffing kids into suits and luring children under the guise of being a friendly mascot character. And then compare that to Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, the game with Glam Rock Freddy and the animatronics with personalities and different designs and character traits and the frickin' Pizzaplex. None of that is actually scary. People don't really think that's scary, right? I think even kids understand that Five Nights at Freddy's isn't scary anymore. None of that is actually scary. Riding around in Glam Rock Freddy and using him as a mech suit and collecting power-ups and avoiding security drones is not scary at all. It's just kind of goofy. And believe me, I'm not here to tell you that you can't enjoy the newer Five Nights at Freddy's games. I really do not care what you do or do not enjoy, and I'm sure the games are actually pretty fun. I haven't really played some of the newer ones, but I really hate when companies think they need to sanitize or lessen their horror in order to accommodate their younger audience. Because the reason that young audience were so drawn to Five Nights at Freddy's in the first place was that it felt dark and disturbing and messed up. It's really fun to find a piece of media that doesn't feel like it was made for you. It's kind of thrilling to engage with something that feels like you might be too young to be experiencing. You could play Five Nights at Freddy's just for the jump scares and not really know the story and the lore behind it all, but it was cool to know in the back of your mind that this game was about a child murderer and haunted robots. Because kids like to be scared. That's why the Goosebumps series was an insanely successful franchise. Kids like the thrill of being scared by something. I loved that feeling when I was a kid. So when you water down a horror property because you think you need to cater to your child audience, then you end up just killing the series not only for kids, but also for all of the older fans. You also end up creating a franchise or a series that your younger fans will eventually grow out of. That's exactly what happened to me with Five Nights at Freddy's. And I'm not here to say that everything should be catered to me as an adult. I really hate when people say that. I hate when people are like, this new animated movie or Pixar movie doesn't align with my adult interests, so it must be a bad movie. It's like, no, sometimes kids media is meant for kids, and that's okay. It's fine to grow out of something. But it's interesting with a series like Five Nights at Freddy's because those original games, at least to me, are still pretty freaky. And so to see them actively tame down this series over time, it just made me be a lot less interested, even when I was still about in the age demographic of a Five Nights at Freddy's fan. Like, if it wasn't even going to attempt to scare me, then why should I feel the need to keep playing what are supposed to be horror games? It kind of felt like the new games were almost talking down to me. And I think what makes this so frustrating for me in particular was the fact that I personally was so invested in the lore of this series. I was there for every MatPat video and lore discovery. I was really scared by the games, so I didn't really play them a whole ton, but my younger brother did, and he wasn't really scared of them like I was, so I would like kind of watch him play, or he would like tell me about all of the secrets inside of the games. It was a really fun experience for both of us. And it felt like this mystery that we were all piecing together, and as the pieces started to come together, it showed the picture of a child murderer killing for the sake of killing, for the fun, the thrill of it. And this murderer was completely nameless and faceless, represented with like the purple Atari sprite and later showing up as Springtrap, which is the scariest animatronic. I mean, the idea of Springtrap is absolutely brilliant and great horror writing. Having a suit that contains all the mechanical parts for an animatronic that you can push out to the side so you can wear it as a costume is a really neat idea. And then revealing at the end of your game that the mechanism keeping all the parts to the side failed and painfully skewered the child murderer alive is just freaking creepy and evil and amazing. That's just a very unsettling idea. Being violently stabbed and ripped apart all at once all over your body is a gruesome and a cool aspect of a series that was trying its best to be scary. And then in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, you're literally being stalked around by an animatronic that has the rotting corpse of a dude inside of it. Again, it's brilliant writing, it's brilliant character design, and I loved that. But then we got into like crazy sci-fi advanced robots with personalities, and the idea that the murderer inside the suit actually stayed alive for 20 years and is now just like walking around. And then the fact that this same child murderer just kept getting killed and coming back, and then finding out that he wasn't just an evil child murderer, he was actually an evil mad scientist. A mad scientist that discovered he could use a special metal in his robots to trap the souls of dead children and then keep himself alive as an animatronic. And then in the books, we find out that he actually likes being the skewered animatronic, so the horrifying moment when he is skewered to death and brought to justice was actually just part of his master plan. Also, spoilers for Five Nights at Freddy's. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. It's not that big of a deal. You probably know the lore of FNAF if you're watching this. But anyways, then our evil mad scientist child murderer has some justice and he gets burned alive in what is a really fantastic ending to the series. But wait, he's now actually alive in the form of a living computer virus that makes people go crazy. And now he's back again underneath the Pizzaplex, but wait, he may actually just be a robot that can shapeshift into other robots and even people. And also, a lot of the robots have special discs on them that release a frequency that makes you see them as scary monsters, and that might be what the fourth game is about. And also, Glamrock Freddy is here to ferry you through this buggy mess of a game, and now you can get power-ups and run around freely instead of being forced to sit in one spot like a lame game. Do you see how all of this adds up to an experience that is so far removed from anything actually scary? Do you see how all of this kind of weakens the fear factor of the series? And I'm well aware that most people are not sticking with the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise because it's actually scary. I'm aware that that ship has sailed. But something about that just bothers me, and it could be a me problem. I want to say this video is just my opinions on stuff because I have a weird chip on my shoulder about this whole thing. But I do think this is emblematic of a larger trend in business where companies and executives think they have to talk down to kids. They think they know better, they think they've cracked the code, and they think they understand what kids want even better than kids do, and that just isn't true. But the worst part about all of this is that it obviously works. Five Nights at Freddy's is one of the most successful video game franchises of all time at this point, and they are selling games and toys and movie tickets like crazy. And I don't want to sit here and say that I know better than the kids that enjoy this franchise and tell them that they're not allowed to enjoy it anymore. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if the series had kept true to its horror roots. Maybe these kids would be more interested in other horror media now. Maybe they would have been able to grow up with the series rather than having the series continue to stray further and further away from what made it scary originally. I think people often assume that kids can't handle creepy concepts or themes of death or loss or grief. They think those things are just too complicated for them. But denying kids the opportunity to engage with and think about those heavy subjects in the context of fiction just leaves them less prepared to face those things when they happen in real life. There's a book that I've talked about on this channel before, but I want to highlight it in this video because it was one of my first experiences with horror as a kid. Wait Till Helen Comes is a 1986 novel by Mary Downing Hahn about a child that befriends the ghost of a young girl after her mother dies in a house fire. I won't spoil what happens in this book in case you're interested in reading it. Even if you're an adult, I would read it. It's a really great example of children's horror and still a really fun book to this day. It's a nice quick read too. But the story tackles themes of survivor's guilt, loss, grief, murder, and even alienation in your own family. And it does all of this while still being a book that was meant to be read by kids. Like I said, it's an easy read, a quick little novel that was written for the express purpose of scaring young readers. And it does this so wonderfully, in my opinion. I remember vividly imagining everything that happened in this book, and I can still, to this day, picture what the house in the story looks like in my head all those years ago. And the book acts as a spooky ghost story, but it also addresses some of those themes that I mentioned earlier in a really insightful and important way. It can be really tempting to remove some of the deeper or more intense themes and ideas from your children's horror project because you worry that the kids will understand them. And a lot of them won't. I didn't understand all the implications that were found inside Wait Till Helen Comes when I read it for the first time. But I actually think that's a really good thing. It lets you soak up some of these deeper ideas and horrifying subtext for you to eventually come back to when you're older. I think we have all experienced a piece of media or a joke in a movie or book that you didn't understand when you were a kid, but one day you finally understood it and it all made sense. The benefit of children's media, especially children's horror, is that you know that most of your audience will be very young and you can create something that grows up with them. And I think that's what Five Nights at Freddy's could have done, and I think it's a big missed opportunity that the series ended up kind of neutering itself. I'm not saying they needed to make M-rated bloody horror games with explicit violence and swearing and nudity, although fan artists have certainly got the nudity part covered. But I would have loved to see the series tell a cohesive story that maintained all of the horrifying implications of the original plot of a child murderer stuffing the suits. Now there are so many dead children in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe that it's become like a point of debate about how many kids are actually dead. But those dead kids don't feel like dead kids anymore. The horrifying image has given way to what essentially amounts to like data points in a spreadsheet. I think there could have been a story told through this series that was intriguing, cryptic, terrifying, and satisfying, and I'm kind of sad that we never got to see that happen really. And who knows, maybe the reanimated corpse of a dead scientist coming back as a living virus in a video game that confirms that all of the games in the original series are just video games in universe could have been the plan from the beginning, but that would shock me. I think there was just something lost when the series realized that it was being heavily enjoyed by kids, and they started kind of marketing it towards the kids and making it more bright and colorful and making it more advertiser friendly and more franchise friendly and more merchandise friendly. But I don't want this video to become me just trashing on Five Nights at Freddy's. I actually really like combing through the lore, and I watch a lot of lore channels, so I don't hate the series by any means. I feel like a couple nights a week I fall asleep every night listening to somebody's 6-hour lore video about what actually happened in Midnight Motorist. And while I'm talking about this issue in the Five Nights at Freddy's series, I think this is an issue across a lot of children's horror currently. I just thought that Five Nights at Freddy's was the best and most well-known example of this trend that I really dislike. Kids can handle horror. They can handle ghosts and loss and grief and even death when it's presented as fiction and not in a gratuitous way. Kids also like to feel like they're getting away with something. I grew up not being allowed to watch rated R movies, so I spent hours researching the most disturbing PG-13 rated movies. And I liked the feeling of the chase when it came to watching something that I probably shouldn't be watching. I also loved like reading messed up creepypastas late at night in my room. And I managed to grow up to be a pretty normal person. I mean, I do spend hours a week talking about disturbing literature and media, but I think I'm pretty normal beyond that. Like, I have friends, like, not a lot of friends, but I do have friends, and I have a wife. Okay, I want to backtrack and say that any of the weirdness that I have definitely exists in me, but I don't want to say that's a symptom of the media that I enjoyed when I was a child. Okay? Cool? That sounds fair to me? But anyway, enough talking about me, an adult. Let kids be into games that aren't really made for them. Let them freak each other out during recess talking about the hidden stories found in scary games. That's all awesome. I remember one time in either 3rd or 4th grade, me and my best friend, who's still one of my best friends to this day, in class, we watched this video, like this cartoon called, I think it was called Teeny Tiny and the Wicked Witch, and it freaked us out. Like, it was an animated cartoon, but it started with like the narration of like a freaky witch lady, and then like the actual like real life footage of somebody's hands doing these like freaky things, and for some reason that just messed us up. But believe me, I do understand that there is so much money to be made in child-friendly horror, like an insane amount of money, like an unreasonable amount of money that is frankly ridiculous. Because you can sell toys and activity books about Five Nights at Freddy's and Bendy and the Ink Machine and Poppy Playtime and Hello Neighbor, but it's all starting to kind of feel like a race to the bottom in terms of actual quality. Mascot horror has been trying to bottle up virality for the past few years, and for every massive success that we see, there are hundreds of failures, hundreds of shovelware games made to make quick money from kids who don't really know any better. And that just doesn't sit well with me. Five Nights at Freddy's was created by a dude who was going to give up on making games, and he used that to make something wild and completely out of left field from what he normally made. And it is insane to think that a game that was partially made from spite and discouragement would go on to create an entire industry of mascot horror games. And I think that success is super impressive and a monumental achievement for indie games in general, because again, it was just made by one guy. But if we let mascot horror become the only horror that children are exposed to, I think that we are going to lose something, and something that I really loved growing up. And that is horror for children that is actually scary, that actually challenges the way they think, that actually makes them stay up a little bit later at night, sleep with the lights on. All that stuff I think is so great for kids to experience. So if you're someone that makes children's horror and you feel discouraged because you feel like you have to make mascot horror, you don't. Just keep doing what you're doing. I promise you are doing the Lord's work by scaring kids. I know that sounds insane, but again, I have so many positive memories from being so freaked out as a kid, and all the kids that read your scary stuff are going to feel the same when they're older. If you're a parent that is looking for some books to introduce your kid to the genre, I have a few suggestions for you that range from not that scary to more terrifying. You can judge what your kids can handle the best. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz is an absolute classic, a staple of childhood trauma. The stories are all very short and bite-sized. The illustrations are also grotesque, but I loved them when I read them in elementary school. Invasion of the Road Weenies and Other Warped and Creepy Tales by David Lubar is one of the books in a series that all have weenies in the title, and I really loved these growing up. They're collections of short horror stories. This is another one that would be great for like later elementary school, and the stories range from kind of goofy and funny to actually really scary, but never like too intense in my opinion. The Goosebumps books are a little bit older now. They came out like in the 90s, but they're still super great reads. You can find the box sets of them for not that much online, and they are a ton of fun. Again, nothing too scary, but they introduce kids to all sorts of horror tropes and monsters in a way that never talks down to them, and some of them are legitimately kind of scary. Also, if you give a kid like a wide selection of a lot of Goosebumps book, it allows them to pick the ones that seem the most interesting to them. I know I did that when I was a kid. I would pick the ones that I thought would be the coolest, and then I would go back and read the ones that I thought would be lame, but the lame ones end up being some of my favorites. The Howladay Inn books are about a family, but mostly written from the perspective of the family dog, and they typically play on like scary animals, but are also pretty lighthearted. These would be good if your kid is an animal lover. I know I was when I was little, and these are pretty quick reads where nothing like intense happens, just mostly silly, spooky fun. If your kid is really young and still reading picture books, then I would really recommend The Teacher from the Black Lagoon, all of the Black Lagoon series. They're picture books about kind of scary monsters that are coming to school, and at the end they find out that they're actually not scary teachers or librarians or custodians. They're actually really nice people. And a great thing about that series is they have a whole selection of picture books, but then they also have chapter books that kind of do other stories there. So it's a good like transition element of like if your kid really likes the picture books, they can start reading the chapter books, but still have a lot of pictures in them and are like really kind of easy reads, but they're a great transition read to get your kid used to reading chapter books. Anything by Mary Downing Hahn, her books are really great and are typically ghost stories. They also have slightly more complicated plots, I would say, and they get readers used to following more characters and having to piece some of the mystery together themselves. She's really good at writing books that once you get the reveals at the end, you can go back and piece it all together, and so they're great rereads. I know when I read Wait Till Helen Comes, I went back and reread it when I was a kid because it was fun to see all those elements that were kind of like brushed over earlier come back into the story later, and I could understand them all now. So that's a great way to get kids used to paying attention to maybe the more mundane aspects of a book because they could be hiding secrets that could pay off later. The Thief of Always by Clive Barker is a sort of dark fantasy book that is really great and deals with themes of growing up and enjoying childhood. It's also written kind of like a dark fairy tale. And beyond horror books, if you're interested in horror movies, I really love the Coraline movie directed by Henry Selick. I think that movie is amazing and totally creepy. The animation style is beautiful and very uncanny. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Old Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps is cheesy, obviously, and like, again, very much from the 90s. It very much feels like a 90s show. But those are still a ton of fun if your kids are into that kind of stuff. But I've just barely scratched the surface of all the wonderful children's horror out there. So please take a look at some of these and share them with your kids. Or if you just want to read some children's horror and see what you maybe missed out on as a kid, read some of these. They're a ton of fun. If you're a teacher and you're watching this, then first off, thank you so much for doing like the hardest job for no money. But make sure you have horror content available in your classroom library. That's where I first found my first horror books. If you're an author of children's horror and you're watching this, then please share your work in the comments. I would love to check them out, and so would so many of my subscribers. And if you're a Five Nights at Freddy's fan and you're still here, then thank you for listening to my ranting. I do really enjoy the series still to this day. I just wish it was a little scarier. Also, to prove that I am in fact a total baby when it comes to the original Five Nights at Freddy's, I will put a clip in here of me playing the VR version of FNAF and totally not being scared at all.
I can't do this.
Yes.
Davis, you can win.
I can't.
If you really want to leave the game, you have to get up in the chair and walk out one of the doors, and that'll quit the game for you.
This?
So you have to actually literally stand up and walk out one of the doors, and that'll quit the level for you.
Holy crap. I can't do this.
So you just have to, yeah.
No, you're kidding.
I'm not kidding. Davis!
Yes, that sound came out of me. No, I do not know how I did that. No, I have not ever returned to playing FNAF VR since this occasion. And if you thought this video was interesting and you want to hear what else I have to say about this stuff, then subscribe and watch all my longer videos about children's horror and All Tomorrows and iceberg content. If you clicked on this video because you're interested in children's horror, then check out my children's horror iceberg video, as well as my other videos on the Weenies series. Those were a ton of fun to make and I loved making them. If you're somebody like me who maybe grew up with Five Nights at Freddy's and kind of feels like you've grown out of it, I also have videos on more disturbing topics. I have one where I talk about Playground, which is a really graphic and gross novel. I have one where I talk about All Tomorrows. That's my most recent upload, or at least it should be, where I talk about this disturbing, twisted future of humanity that was genetically engineered to be like these living, horrifying, fleshy skin creatures. I also have an iceberg video where I talk about creepypasta, and in my iceberg videos, I go into like in-depth synopsises and summaries of a lot of the stories in there, so you'll get all of those when you watch those. It's not just me being like, here is something I think this is scary. Here is something I don't think this is scary. They're a lot more in-depth than you'd normally see, so go check those out. If you want to support me further, then you can become a channel member where you will get early access to all my videos, access to exclusive videos, and also access to my monthly book club. There is a link to join in the description of this video, so go check that out. Thank you to all my wonderful channel members whose names you're seeing on the screen right now, and an extra special thank you to all my gold tier members, Jenna Berry, Miss Joy 16, Pyrocat, B, Vic's Corner, Lex, Tyler the Leper, Coco Boko, Ezra, Blue Radio Media, Silent Trails, Chris Lamb, Lucas Fernando, and Amanda Mapes. Your guys' support really does mean the world to me, and I'm excited to discuss Piranesi with you guys for this next week's book club. It's going to be a ton of fun. I loved that book. But thank you everyone again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.